Hello friends, we'll be discussing a problem which is related to the educational institutions. The moment we have understood about the kind of education institutions that we have which are registered under society, we have an illustration related to that itself. So now that we know that all these education institutions, they have those four pillars whereby we have a president, secretary, treasurer and executive committee members, and it is guided under the Indian Societies Act. Now we can prepare an income and expenditure statement along with the balance sheet for such educational institutions as well. So we have an illustration for your reference, just for your reference itself, so that you can know if such kind of problem comes in your exam, how you're going to tackle it. So here we have this here. Now, the balances have been given here for the Republican College. We have to prepare the income and expenditure statement and the balance sheet as of March 2016. Now here we have given all the items in two phases, part 1 and part 2. Both are similar. It is just that the problem was too long for this page to be incorporated here. Hence we have divided into two pages here. So part 1 is all the items. Part 2 is again the continuation of all the items. Now we'll study. That means every item that has been mentioned here, or rather this is a trial balance that is given to you, which gives you the details of debit and credit items. So let's figure out what exactly we have. So everything that is mentioned on the credit side can be either an income, can be either a liability. Everything that is mentioned on the asset side, or rather the debit side, can be either an asset or can be either a payment that has been done. So we have seminar and conference receipts. We have consultancy receipts. We have security deposits. That means again that's a liability, hence it has been mentioned on the credit side. We have capital funds, or we have different kind of funds, rather capital research. We have building fund, we have provident fund. We have another income which is mentioned as tuition fee received. We have government grants and donations. We have interest and dividend on investments. We have hostel room rent. We have mess receipt, which is the net amount. We have college store, whereby sales happen in that college store. It may be books, it may be stationery, etc. Anything. We have outstanding expenses. We have stock of stores and supplies. That's the opening balance that has been given to us. That means the opening stock of store and supplies. We have additional purchases done related to stock and supplies as well. We have salary which has been given to teaching and research. Library fees has been mentioned. Now on the next part we have scholarship. We have student welfare expenses. We have repairs and maintenance. We have games and sport expenses and miscellaneous fees. We have research fund investment, that's an asset for us. We have other investment, that's again an asset. We have provident fund investment, that will be again going into the asset. So these are the balance sheet items. Seminar and conference expenses will be again a part of income and expenditure. Consultancy expenses. We have land, building, plant and machinery. We have furniture as well, which would be again a part of balance sheet, hence not a part of income and expenditure. We have motor vehicle as well, and apart from that we have provision for depreciation, which is for plant, building and machinery and furniture. And we have the cash at bank. So the total has been mentioned here. There are certain adjustments also which will be referred here. Let's go through them. Adjustment. The first adjustment refers to the material that has been consumed out of the college store, that is stores and supplies. For teaching, it has gone up to 50,000. For research, the material and the stock which has been consumed amounts to 1,50,000. Student welfare, it is 75,000. Games or sports, it is 25,000. Now the next adjustment states that tuition fee receivable from the government, which is for the backward class, amounts to 80,000 here. So this is the receivable. That means something that we're still supposed to receive. It's an asset for us. Now, the store's selling prices are fixed in such a way that it will give 10% of net profit on the selling price itself. This is another adjustment, and this will be utilized whenever the consumed stock is supposed to be calculated. On that whole amount, you will be getting 10% of net profit. Now, depreciation is provided at the rate of straight line method, and the rate of interest, or rather the rate of depreciation here on different assets have been mentioned. For building, it is 5%. Plant and equipment, it is 10%. Furnitures, it is 10%. And motor vehicle, it is 20%. Now, with this illustration, we'll go ahead with the working first. So for material and supplies, we'll first figure out what is the closing stock, because that will be essential for us to figure out when we have to place that same thing in the balance sheet. So to figure out the closing stock, we know opening stock, add purchases, add expense, less any items, and then closing stock comes in. So we'll figure out what exactly we have to paste here. So the format that we've mentioned here is opening stock. We have to add purchases in it. We have to subtract the cost of material. After that, whatever consumption has been done, we have to subtract that also. Whatever balance will be left will be the closing stock here. So let's mention the opening balance. So if you can see in the part 1, or rather the phase 1 that we mentioned related to the debit and credit items, it was mentioned as opening stock of, or rather the stock of material and supplies, opening balance is 3 lakh. Right below that, there was another mentioned as purchases done for stock and supplies, 8 lakhs. So out of that, 11 lakh is the total opening stock plus purchases. Consumption done is already mentioned in the adjustment. The total will come to 3 lakh here. The cost of material that has been mentioned here is 6,75,000. So the total balance what we have is the closing stock that will be mentioned in the balance sheet. So this has been mentioned. So that is the closing stock here. Now the next working will be on the assets that we have. So when we talk about the assets that we have building, plant equipment, and furnitures and fixtures. We have the opening balances, we have the additions that we have done here. We'll mention that, and together the clubbing of that will give you the closing balance. Now, whatever we are doing here is the rate of depreciation. That means this is giving you the provision for depreciation closing balances. So the provision for depreciation for all these three assets have been already mentioned. Let's mention that amount here. So we have 4,80,000, we have 5,10,000, and we have 3,36,000. Now, on the rates of depreciation that was mentioned there, we have to give out the depreciation here, and that will be the closing balances of provision for depreciation that will be mentioned in the balance sheet here. So now the provision for depreciation, rather the depreciation that you have to calculate here, is on the cost of the building. If you see the cost of the building, this has been given as straight away method. It's a straight line method that they're talking about. So 5% is the straight line provision that has been already done here. So let's figure out how much is the actual thing, or rather the actual cost of the asset. So for building, the actual cost is 16 lakh, which has been mentioned here. On that, if you calculate 5%, you get 80,000. That is the other provision that you will be doing. Similarly, for plants and equipments, we'll figure out the actual cost of it. It has been mentioned as 8,50,000. That's the actual cost of it. On that, we have to calculate the rate of depreciation that has been already provided to us. Now, on 8,50,000, we have 10% depreciation to be calculated. So that will give you 85,000. Again, furniture and fixtures, we have the actual cost of asset, which is 6 lakh rupees. On that also, you have to calculate 10%, which is 60,000. So the closing balance for provision for depreciation will be the total opening balance plus the addition to it. So now that we have mentioned all the items here, let's go on to the preparation of income and expenditure account. So right now we'll be preparing the income and expenditure account. Let's prepare that. So we'll first fill up all the incomes first. So the first income will be tuition fees. This will be the mentioned amount here as well as the receivable amount. So that means 8 lakh has been already mentioned there and the 80,000 which is still receivable. So that will be accrued income. So 8,80,000 will be the tuition fees. So 8,80,000 refers to 80,000 as a part of the adjustment that was mentioned and 8 lakh towards the actual fees receivable. Now the next one would be the government grants here. So for government grants, if there is any specific fund related to it, then you can capitalize that. But if it is not there, you can directly put it into income and expenditure statement. Now the next item that we'll be referring here is the hostel room rent. We are first mentioning all the items whereby there is no adjustment related to it. So hostel room rent has been mentioned here as 1,75,000. Let's mention the next income. Continuation of topic. Now the next income will be received, or rather will be mentioned here is the mess received. So we're considering all the items that are only of revenue nature. Rest everything will be part of balance sheet here. Now the next item that we'll be mentioning here is the profit on store sale. Store did a sale of 7,50,000. On that we are supposed to get a net profit of 10% as mentioned in the adjustment. So 7,50,000 multiplied by 10% will give you 75,000 here. After that we'll mention the seminar conference income. Now here when we're talking about seminar conference, we'll mention the net amount. Why is because we have seminar conference income as well and we have seminar conference expense as well. So income minus expense, whatever balance is left can be moved out. So for receipt we have 4,80,000 and for expense we have 4,50,000. So the balance that is left is a positive balance has been moved out. Now the next or the second last that we have is the consultancy expense or income. Now for consultancy receipts, we have the receipts mentioned as 1,28,000 and the expenses related to it is one, or rather we can talk about, we have receipts of 1,28,000 for consultancy and similarly we have consultancy expenses for 28,000. So that will be subtracted out of 1,28,000. The balance 1 lakh will be taken out here. The reason why we are doing this is because we are adjusting both the debit and credit items here together so that we can reduce the stress here. And the last is the donation. Now, with this, we have completed the income parameter. Let's go on to the expense part. Now, when we talk about revenue expenses, we're talking about the salaries first. So we mentioned to salary, teaching and research 8,50,000 and 1,20,000 respectively here. Let's go on to the next revenue expense. The next one can be repairs and maintenance. Apart from that, the next one can be the material, or rather the material consumed of stock and supplies. So now the material consumed has been given for 4 aspects. We have in the specifications mentioned for teaching, research, games and sports and other student welfare as well. So everything can be clubbed together, or you can club each one of it with their respective heads. That means student welfare expense can be added with this material consumed, and teaching and research can be added with the stock of teaching, or rather the salaries of teaching, and this thing separately can be done, and it can be clubbed together as well. We'll mention it separately. The next one can be to sports and games expenses. So the expense total here, the cash payment that has been made is 50,000. Simultaneously, that material has been also consumed here for sports, so that can be also clubbed here. The next can be student welfare expense, again cash and material. Now the next revenue expense can be miscellaneous expense, 65,000. Again, we have scholarships for 80,000, that can be also a part here. And the last phase, or rather the revenue expense that we can mention here, is the depreciation that we are providing here. For building plant and furniture, we have already calculated. Let's mention that same amount. Now, the cost of the motor vehicle is 1,85,000. On that, you have to provide 20% depreciation. So, on 1,80,000, which is the cost of the motor vehicle, 20% depreciation will be 36,000. So, with this, we have mentioned all the revenue expenses, all the revenue incomes. Now, let's figure out the interim balance and see whether we have surplus or deficit. So, for the expenditure side, we have 18,76,000 as the interim balance. Now for the income, we have 20 lakh 10,000. That means it's a clear-cut case of surplus here. So 1 lakh 34 is the surplus, and that will be moved to the balance sheet now. So now when we're calculating the balance sheet, we understand that this is the last phase of this illustration. So the capital fund was already mentioned 16 lakh 6,000. In that you have to add surplus. So surplus is added as 1,34,000, plus we have to add additional item here, that is income from investment. Now we have to mention that amount here. So the total income from investment can be either moved into income and expenditure side, or you can either capitalize it, but you need to leave a footnote here. So that gives you a total of 19 lakh 25,000. Now we have the different funds that were mentioned here. We'll mention all those funds here. So apart from that, we have certain current liabilities as well. Provident fund will be a part of current liability, so we'll mention that there. Continuation of topic. Now there are other expenses, or rather outstanding liabilities can be also mentioned here. So security deposit, that is the last part, 1,50,000 has been also mentioned. So all the liabilities phase has been completed here. Now let's go on to the asset side. So we have the cost of fixed assets, we have the depreciation that is supposed to be subtracted, that will be done, and the net amount will be mentioned outside. Land is the only asset where depreciation is not provided, hence 1 lakh is the exact amount that is mentioned outside. Next one will be buildings. So now the depreciation will be the actual, or rather the total amount of provision for depreciation, which includes 4,80,000 plus the additions that we had done. So that total amount will be subtracted here. So all the assets have been mentioned. Now there is one more expense, or rather assets we can call about as library. Now there are certain investments that were done. We'll mention all those investments here. So investments we have mentioned, the capital fund investment, also known as the other investment, which is amounting to 18,50,000. Research fund and provident fund investment has been mentioned. Now we can mention the closing stock of material consumed, which was already calculated, 1,25,000. The next item that we can mention here is the tuition fee that is supposed to be received by us. Again, it is still accrued. We can talk about it has been earned, hence it was calculated in profit, but we haven't received it, hence it is still an asset for us. And the last item that we can mention here is the cash and bank balance, 6,42,000. So with this, we have completed the balance sheet. Let's now figure whether the total of the liability side equalizes to the total of asset side or not. So now on the liability side, we have a total of 61,10,000. So asset side total also comes to 61,10,000. So this is how, whenever if you have any educational institution problem, you have to consider the revenue items and the capital items first. Then capital items will be segregated to the balance sheet, revenue items will be segregated to the income and expenditure statement, and accordingly once they have been segregated, then you can pass the adjustments through it, and then you can start posting. It is a bit lengthy for you, but again there is a precise format that you need to format, or rather you need to go ahead with that specific precise format itself. Only then you will be able to prepare a flawless statement here. So make sure all these adjustments, basically in CPT or rather in CPT accountancy, you need to know more about the theoretical part where adjustments are concerned. What is the effect of the adjustment? Only then you will be able to grasp the question and answer it within a minute or within a second. According to that basis itself, you will be able to select the correct option out of the multiple choice questions that you have. So make sure you go through all the adjustments very clearly, understand how every adjustment is supposed to be done, and if you have to practice adjustments, go through such sums, you'll be able to clarify, or rather clear everything or clarify everything when it comes to adjustments being used here for preparation of any kind of illustration. So that's it all for the video. Thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned with Ekeeda and keep subscribing to Ekeeda.